everybody, good morning and welcome. Nick with Warrior to Bass Guide Service. Today we're going to be out here in an undisclosed location here in Florida. This is actually a new body of water that we're going to be dissecting and trying to develop a pattern on. I've got a buddy of mine, a good friend of mine that's actually in from Tennessee, Scott, who's going to be out here with us today, and he's going to be kind of helping us develop that pattern, try to figure out what these fish are wanting today. What it is a very shallow water lake, just like a lot of the lakes here in Florida. We're going to be fishing in anything from about 3.5 feet and less, and there's a lot of vegetation. If you just kind of look out here, you can see there's just a ton of cover for these fish. You've got a mixture of some hyacinth mats, these big bushy things that you see, mixed in with some really thick hydrilla. There's a little bit of eelgrass in some of these spots. So for those of you guys not familiar with with a lot of these different vegetations in Florida, these are the prominent vegetations that you'll see in a lot of these different bodies of water, and they're just really productive in terms of bass fishing. They really provide a good hiding spot for a lot of the bait. That bait has the opportunity to actually hide down in there and reproduce. And then obviously in terms of the food source for the bass, you'll see with the fish today that we'll probably catch out here will be really good size, just because they're eating very good, they're very healthy. So stay tuned, should have a lot of fun, and hopefully you guys will learn a lot from what we figure out here on this lake today. So we got out here right about daybreak this morning, and we were able to get a pretty good look at the cover and the vegetation that we're going to be fishing here. So Scott and I decided to tie on some topwater frogs. This just looks like a topwater frog heaven. I don't think you'd really be able to fish anything with treble hooks in here just because of the amount of vegetation, but we've got two different color frogs tied on, and we're both throwing pretty much the same frog. It's just your traditional topwater hollow body popping frog. And the big thing with the colors, I'm throwing a black with a yellow on the back, and Scott's actually throwing it's called a leopard frog, and it's got that white bottom, but it's got that kind of chartreuse side with the brown top. Hopefully when the sun comes up here a little later, I'll show you guys. There are some really ginormous grasshoppers out here, and I mean there's thousands of them, and that you'll see the fish will be blowing up on them and eating them, and that's a primary food source in here. And they look just about identical to what Scott's throwing. So you hear that term, match the hatch. Well, Scott's pretty much doing exactly that. His bait could be potentially mimicking exactly what those fish are feeding on, which is why he started with that color. So we're going to work this top water. It's early morning. The fish should be a little bit active, kind of moving around, feeding on bait. So, I mean, you can see here we got a big dragonfly. I mean, these are all food sources out here. Anything from not just shad and bluegill and shiners, but those grasshoppers, these dragonflies, they'll feed on all that stuff. So we'll keep working this frog here. You can kind of see, the way Scott's working his frog here. He's doing a mixture of different presentations. Right now he's just kind of popping along. You can also do the walk the dog method with this. Is a great frog if you want to try to walk the dog, and you can see it just kind of got that side to side action. And where that technique and that particular retrieve comes in handy is if you're in a small pocket. Let's say you get a little hole in the vegetation, just maybe it's a 3 foot by 3 foot area that you can actually work that bait. Instead of just popping it towards you, if you walk the dog and you get that side to side action going, what it does is it's moving, but it's not moving forward. So it allows you to keep that bait within that strike zone for a longer period of time, which in turn could potentially lead to enticing that strike. So that's what we're going for. A lot of these fish, yes, they might be feeding, especially this time of the day, early morning. They're typically cruising the flats, they're chasing bait. However, if they're not, you can a lot of times entice a bite just because that fish is territorial. So if that fish is territorial and just strikes that bait because it's in their home, chances are the longer you keep it there, the better your chance is going to be of actually getting that fish to bite. So that's kind of the idea between, behind the walk the dog method. And we're just going to change it up. You try different cadences. You can twitch, pause, twitch, pause, or you can just pop, and then pause it. So we're going to change up the cadence, and every time we get a bite, we're taking a mental note. We're saying to ourselves, okay, when did that bite come? Did that bite come, when my bait was paused and was just sitting? Or, was I popping it really hard, making a lot of noise, attracting fish to that bait? Or was I just doing the walk the dog action? So that's not just with frog fishing or any topwater bait fishing. That's just fishing in general. You always want to, try to take that mental note and pay attention and focus to what exactly you were doing when you got that bait. And when you start to see a pattern is when it happens 2, 3, 4 times in a row. Okay, I had that bait paused and I got that bite. Happened again and again and again, so on and so forth. Well, now that you're actually developing a pattern, these fish are preferring that bait when it's paused. Or if you're fishing a moving bait, you're swimming it through the water. That constant steady retrieve just doesn't seem to be doing it. But when you give it that little twitch every now and then, that's when you're getting the bite. So there's little things you want to pay attention to, not just in this style of fishing, but any kind of fishing. So we'll give this a little while, and should be able to pick up a few bites. What you'll notice, with this particular cover, you can see all these vegetation mats out here, and I can't stress enough how important the placement of your bait and the accuracy of your cast is, simply because you can be 2 or 3 feet off the target that you're intending to hit, and that could be the difference between getting that strike or not, especially if you're dealing with a territorial fish. If this fish isn't hungry and isn't super active, he might not be willing to swim out from underneath that mat or go 5, 6 feet to where your bait is at to feed. But if you put it right in their face, there's a good chance they're probably going to eat it. So this is where, practicing on the accuracy of your casting really comes into play. And what we'll do a lot of times out here, because we're in such shallow water, the fish can be easily spooked. So what we want to do is if I see any kind of vegetation, I see a mat, what I want to do is cast my bait on top of that mat, limiting the amount of splash, and hopefully alleviating that, that spook, scaring that fish that might be sitting there. So I'll pull it off this mat, and a lot of times I'll hit it right off the edge. I start walking it. Notice how I'm walking it and popping it, but it's not really moving forward a whole lot. And I'll give it a pause every now and again. And in my experience, what I've noticed when you're fishing a body of water that's really shallow like this, your trolling motor can actually be your worst enemy. It creates a lot of noise and vibrations, and there's not a lot of depth or water here to kind of, for all that noise and vibration to go. So in my experience with fishing something like this, typically I tend to get more of my bites when my bait is far out. Now, don't get me wrong, if the fish are really active and they're eating, I've had them hit it at the boat. You're getting ready to pull your lure up and you're getting ready to make that next cast, and they'll hit it as you're pulling it up. But for the most part, I've noticed you want to launch this bait out there, get it away from the boat, and that's when you're going to pick up the majority of the bites. Did you hit that pocket back there? Go ahead. A lot of times these little open pockets, like where Scott's casting, notice how he casted. He wants to work that pocket, but he's actually casted beyond his target. This way he doesn't, if there is a fish holding there, he doesn't spook him. So he casted beyond that pocket on top of that mat, limiting the amount of splash and noise that bait makes when it enters the water. And now he's just kind of working it through that area. The cover, and it's not just the cover that you see. A lot of the stuff that you see is, you know, this hydrilla, which is, you know, pretty much the most prominent vegetation that you'll find in these freshwater lakes here in Florida. Where you see it out here, these clumps that have topped out, that's not, there's a lot of submerged stuff that we can't see as well. But yeah, to answer your question, they are going to relate to that hydrilla or these big clumps of hyacinth mats that you can see on the surface. That's kind of where they're going to be.
Are they doing that to kind of like hide from the sun?
Well, this time of day, you know, it's not, the water temperature's not really up yet. The sun's not high. So this time of day, they'll tend to come out from under those mats and they'll feed. But, you know, once the sun comes up and that water temperature starts heating up, they'll sit at the base of these big clumps, and they'll use it for a couple different reasons. One, for the shade factor, but two, you know, when the water temperature does heat up and it starts to get really warm, these fish tend to get lethargic. You know, they're not quite as active. So what they'll do is they'll use this vegetation as a vantage point to ambush, you know, their bait. So it could be a you know, quick meal opportunity. You know, if they're sitting right in a, you know, there's you got a point of grass and the wind's blowing into that point of grass, it's probably pushing bait in there. Well, if they're just sitting right inside that little grass patch, that's a lot easier for them to just open their mouth, inhale that piece of bait, and just, you know, take that thing in, as opposed to having to swim through the flats and kind of find their bait. So they're looking for, you know, once temperatures get up like that, they're holding in these mats because they're looking for that easy meal kind of thing. Bass are opportunistic feeders. You know, we get so wrapped around, you know, the colors of our baits, and, you know, well, it's got this color glitter and that color glitter and this shimmer of gold and this, you know, a little bit of chartreuse. And while I do think color tends to play a factor at times, I don't get too wrapped around the color. I'm more concerned with the size of my bait and the action of my bait. You know, because I think as humans, we tend to think kind of along the lines that we think. You know, if you go to a restaurant, you have a menu to look at and you get to determine, oh, I don't think I want that, or, you know, I think I kind of want this. Well, bass don't think that way. They have, you know, the instinct, the eating instinct. That's just, they're opportunistic eaters. So they eat to survive, not because of pleasure. So when the bait is there, a lot of times they're eating it simply because that's when you eat, is when the food is there. So I don't really think that they're, now if you get a really heavily pressured body of water where the fish are really finicky, yes, then you can try to dial it in and figure out if color, you know, they might be eating this color more than others. And I always do, you know, like how Scott and I are starting out this morning, we'll try 2 different colors just to see if they happen to be eating one more than the other. But for the most part, I think that they don't sit there and decide, do I want that? I mean, it's not really that shad color that I normally like. It's got too much orange. A lot of times if they're territorial and or hungry, they're going to eat it regardless of the color. Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you know, another thing too is, you know, that you want to think about is you want to fish, you know, a lure or a bait that you think is good for the cover, but also something that's a confidence bait. So if it's something that you've got a lot of confidence in, you know, you want to give it some time. Now, some people might make 10 casts, 12 casts and decide to switch a bait. For me personally, you know, I'm probably going to give, especially if I'm in an area like this where it just looks like a frog would get eaten, then yeah, I might give it 30 minutes of just hardcore, you know, casting and really working in that bait, you know, to the best of my ability, trying different retrievals, trying different, you know, cadences, just seeing. And at that point, if I don't even get a sniff or a look at my bait, then maybe I'll switch it up. And obviously it's a little bit harder to try to develop a pattern when you're by yourself, as opposed to having, you know, a buddy on the boat with you, or maybe 2 buddies on the boat with you, because you guys, you know, essentially could all be fishing 3 different baits and try to dial in. You know, they might not want a frog. They might want something that's just subsurface, and they might want a moving bait, or they might be super sluggish and they might just want something crawling on the bottom, you know. But To answer your question, yeah, I'll usually give it about a good, 20, 30 minutes before I give it up, and sometimes, it's a timing thing. Sometimes they might not be feeding first thing in the morning. As weird as that sounds, everything that we've always learned about bass fishing is usually that topwater bite's usually first thing in the morning and late in the evening. I've had places where, the topwater bite isn't that fantastic until the sun comes up a little bit. And there's a lot of different reasons why, or different reasons that could be. I couldn't tell you exactly why that is. But that's another reason why I'll just give it a little more time, because it could be a timing thing. They might not eat right away, but once that sun gets up a little bit, they might be wanting that frog. Not a giant, but that's a good chunk right there. And you can see when I get her up here, I'll show you the placement of the hook there. Let me get my power poles down. You can see here, that's exactly where you want to hook those fish. I may have got a double in her. Yep, see I got 2 hooks. If you look, 1, 2, right in the top of the lip. That doesn't get any better. She wasn't going anywhere. Nice little chunk. Start off the day. I'll let her go. Now another thing, when you're fishing these frogs, obviously every time you get a fish, you want to check your bait, make sure it's still good to go, reset it. But sometimes these hollow body frogs tend to take on a little water. So every now and again, every 5, 6 casts or whatever, what I'll do is I'll squeeze them. You can see a little bit of water. There wasn't a lot in there, but sometimes, when your bait gets hit and it gets submerged, goes under the water, it'll take on some water and it'll fill up. The bait will fill up. So you'll notice that a lot of times you throw your bait out there and you're working it just doesn't seem to be working the way that it should be. The action is just a little bit off. Chances are you probably got water in your frog. So just, simple fix for that is just to kind of squeeze it, get all the water out of there, and then you're good to go. You're ready to go. Make sure when you get a fish, and make sure those hooks are still exposed. Every now and again they'll get kind of caught in the body like that, and that could potentially cause you to lose a fish on the next one. So just constantly checking your bait, making sure everything's in order the way it should be. I think he followed it up. A lot of times when you're working any kind of topwater bait like this or any kind of swim bait and you're in a shallow water area, sometimes the fish will give themselves away. You'll see them kind of wake up behind it. They'll come up and, sometimes they'll just come up and they'll just crush it. There's other times they'll just like kiss it. They'll just, and you think it's just a small one because it ain't nothing but a ripple that you see. You reel down, you set the hook, and that thing just starts pulling back, and you're like, holy cow. So that's kind of deceiving, but sometimes they'll eat like that, and they don't always just completely blow up on it. Sometimes they're a little bit more subtle in the way that they take the bait. I've had a fish, I thought it was a bluegill, believe it or not, because it came up to the bait and it kind of nudged it, just kind of like bumped it with her nose. And when she did that, she was so big, even though she just nudged it, it kind of sounded like a bluegill pop. It was just, came up and she nudged it with her nose. So I kept working it. She came up behind it, she nudged it again. I was like, oh, that's got to be a bluegill or something like that. So I kept working it. Well, the third time she didn't nudge it. She, just inhaled it. And I was shocked. I wasn't expecting that fish because I thought, one second I'm thinking it's a bluegill. And next thing you know, this huge explosion on my bait. So it just goes to show you, sometimes even the big fish can be, the most subtle bites at times. This kind of heavy cover, you got to make sure you've got the right equipment. Normally if you're fishing a frog in an open water scenario, you could probably get away with a 7 to 7'4" medium heavy rod. But when you're fishing this type stuff, you really want something. You want a heavy action rod, something that's got some backbone to it. Kind of horse them out of that stuff, because a lot of times you'll catch these fish out here And because it's so shallow, there's nowhere for them to go. So they're just going to go left or right at you. And with as much vegetation's out here, they'll try to find something to wrap you up in. So typically, you know, heavy action rod with some good braid. Out here, you know, we don't really fish with anything less than 50-pound test. And that's just, might seem a little overkill, but I've actually had fish out here that have got me in some thick stuff that will break that 50-pound test. So having the right equipment is definitely imperative. I got one follow me. May have been a gar. That or just a fish that just wasn't ready to commit. And I've had days where you'll get these giant blow-ups, but they don't take the bait. They're just kind of coming up and swatting at it. And those days are so frustrating. You'll be working the bait and you can tell it's a giant, but they never hit it. They never eat it. Bait never even goes down. They just come up and swipe at it. That's mainly just territorial fish that aren't really hungry. A lot of times that happens, you know, full moon conditions when they've been eating all night. And you put it right in the perfect spot, but they're just gorged from the night prior and they're just not eating. And then you get other times where they just choke the bait. Seems like the two we've caught so far this morning had the bait pretty good, so hoping that trend kind of continues. When you're fishing a body of water like this, the placement of your bait and the accuracy of your cast, like we talked about, is just so important. And there's spots where you'll get it in the absolute perfect spot. And it's just always, you know, give that feeling of satisfaction, you know, when you get that bite, because you know that, you know, you worked for it, and you know that the practice, all the hours of practice of casting paid off at that point. You know, sometimes you'd think you'd have to work that bait a little more subtle because the water's so calm, and then if the wind picks up, you'd obviously have to work it a little harder, try to draw more attention, create more commotion. But I've seen times where you kind of follow that rule of thumb and it's the complete opposite. So it's just, you know, it changes every day, and these fish don't always, you know, kind of obey by what we know is how it should be. Yeah, exactly. You know, when you're fishing a frog, it's hard not to take your eye off the bait. You know, so many different noises, and sometimes you'll hear splashes and blow-ups in and around you. But you want to try to stay focused on your bait the whole time. I mean, you just want to really hone in on that thing and just watch it, because especially when you get a cast like this where your bait's super far out and you can kind of barely see it. So you really want to focus on it. This way, when you do get that blow up and the water explodes out from underneath of it, you can tell whether or not that fish has the bait. You know, because sometimes they'll come up and they might just swipe at it the first time. But if you jerk it or start reeling it and they miss it the first time, there's a good chance they probably won't come back for a second time. But if you've got focused on that bait and you've got enough discipline to where, oh, he didn't get it, let me just keep working it, a lot of times that fish will come back after it a second time. We'll give you a second chance. It's those times when you look away and you just hear the blow up and you just reel and set the hook because you're not sure if they have it or not, that you end up losing a lot of fish. Yeah, my experience. Now here, it's really never been an early morning bite. Like I've never just destroyed them early. It's always when the sun gets up a little bit. For whatever reason is when it seems like these fish will start feeding. This is the luxury of having two guys on the boat. You can change it up and, you know, try different baits and just try to, you know, try to dial something in. So while Scott's working that frog, I'm going to start throwing a topwater swim bait and see if maybe they're just wanting something that's moving bait, as opposed to that frog. You know, it changes day in and day out, conditions, you know, lunar calendar, all that stuff. So try this and try a couple others till we develop some kind of pattern. But with this one, you can kind of see the action. That paddle tail is pretty much doing the work. Same thing though, it's weedless, so you want to throw it up on top of the weeds, try to limit that noise, that splash. And keeping it just kind of on the surface there, buzzing it across the top. You can hear that tail. It's kind of making that chug, 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 chug. A lot of times that noise is what will trigger a lot of bites. They just can't stand that noise. So with this bait, you can run it on the surface across the top of the weeds like I am, or you can go just subsurface and go just under. And you can see the action of that tail when it's just under the surface. And what I run when I do it, it's a weighted EWG hook, and basically it's just got a 1/8 ounce weight on there. You can see that little black thing is my 1/8 ounce weight. And then the top of it here, it's got a little screw head. You just kind of screw it like a cork, just screw it, you know, centered on the top of that bait, screw it in, and then you push that hook through and then skin it. You know, push that hook, I'll come all the way through, and then I'll skin it again under the plastic, and that'll keep it weedless. A lot of times when they hit this swim bait, they don't, you know, we were talking about how sometimes they'll hit that frog real subtle, they'll just come up and inhale it. I've noticed with the swim bait, because it's a moving bait, usually they're pretty angry when they hit it. They come up and they let you know they're there. They'll usually crush this thing. Hearing a lot of big splashes around here. I don't know if you guys watching can see, but there's a pretty significant amount of gators, you know, kind of around the area that we're we're fishing. And you know, down here in Florida, you know, gators can be looked at. You know, some people might say, oh, there's not going to be any fish in that area because there's gators. It's actually kind of the opposite down here. You know, if you see gators, you know, kind of in a one particular area, you know, congregated in a small area, a lot of times they're there for a reason. Either there's good oxygen levels in the area that they're in, or it's a good food source. So they feed on the same fish that we're trying to catch. So yes, while you know, they can spook the fish, there's also a reason that they're there. So little, you know, looking for little things like that, just little signs that might make one spot better than another. Another thing too is there's been a lot of bait flickering. You can look around and just see there's a lot of little bait fish just kind of being chased, maybe by smaller panfish or something like that, but they're here. There's a good food source here for the fish. When you're fishing any kind of swim bait like this, it's, you know, very similar to what we talked about before. Still, you're using heavy braided line, nice stout rod. But the key with this is you want to have a nice high speed reel ratio on whatever reel you're using. The goal is you want to keep that bait on the surface. So if you can find something with a 7:3 to 1 gear ratio or faster, I think this one here is an 8:1 to 1. It just keeps you from having to, crank. Allows you to just kind of nice steady retrieve, but still keep that bait on the surface. What I'll do is notice how my rod tip's nice and high, keeping that bait on the surface. That's where they're going to hit it. Now when I get my bite, what I'll do is that bait will be on the surface. I'll get my bite. I'll kind of step forward a little bit, lean into the fish, and I'm dropping my rod tip as I do that. I'm giving him a little bit of slack to be able to eat that bait. Give him that 2 count, 1 1,000, 2 1,000, reel down, and then I can hammer him. I can set the hook. You see, the good thing about this swim bait is it just skims right over top of that grass.
I guess that doesn't get hung up too bad.
Nah. But sometimes you'll get into a pocket and you'll throw it in that pocket. If you get it in there perfectly, you might only get 2 or 3 cranks and they'll eat it. I've even had it where it literally hits the water and simultaneously you get a bite. So all these little openings that you see, we're going to be fishing in all these little holes. Oh, you know what? I'm going to need another one on here. This thing, the skirt's pretty much gone on this thing. So I'm basically gonna switch it up. The topwater approach, we picked up a few nice bites, but it just doesn't seem to be producing the way that I was hoping it would. And it could be, it could turn on, a little later, but for now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna just switch it up. I'm gonna switch over to a chatterbait, a little moving bait, something just kind of under the surface. You got to kind of be careful with a chatterbait out here. As you know, it's not really a weedless bait. That hook's constantly exposed. So I'm going to give this a shot and see if they're just wanting a different movement. Something with some flash, maybe some trigger reaction bite or something like that. Cut off my tag ends, and basically all I'm throwing here is a Z-Man custom white chatterbait with a razor shad trailer on here. So nothing too crazy, but just give them a little different presentation and see if they want it. When you fish this chatterbait, especially when there's hydrilla, it can be really productive. A lot of people don't quite understand the way to fish it. They think if there's grass that you shouldn't fish a chatterbait, but You know, you almost want there to be grass when you're fishing this chatterbait. You'll notice, you know, I can feel my rod tip vibrating. You know, that bait's moving back and forth, back and forth. All it is basically chatterbait's just a sexy name for a vibrating jig. And you'll see as I get my bait closer here, all it is a blade on the front of it. Oh, Scott got a bite. Let's set the hook on the slack line again.
No, he just didn't have it.
I'm just fucking with you, dude. But basically what you actually want to be ticking the tops of that grass. So there's a bunch of scattered hydrilla out here, and you know, I'll feel my rod tip vibrating. I feel the action of that bait, and every now and again it'll get bogged down in that grass. It'll stop vibrating. I can feel them hung up, and a lot of times if you just keep reeling, you know, you'll feel that tension, but it'll come loose. It'll break through that grass, and a lot of times you pull it off that blade of grass is when they'll eat it. Almost triggers a reaction strike. Now sometimes that bait won't come free. You know, you'll get in that grass, it'll start to get bogged down, and it won't come free. And at that point, you'll see me. I'll kind of pop my rod tip, you know, get it out of that grass. And even then, you know, sometimes you'll have some grass on there. You'll pop it, and as soon as you pop it off that grass, they'll eat it. So it's pretty cool bite. Sometimes it's funny. You think you got grass on there, it'll just get that real heavy, spongy feeling, and all of a sudden that grass will start pulling back. You're like, oh, that's grass. That's not grass. That's a fish. So sometimes you'll get more subtle bites like that, and then there's other times where they'll just hammer it, and there's no doubt about it that that's a bite. See right there, I got hung up. Just pop it a little bit and get it through that grass. And even though we can't really see all this grass, it's submerged. Oh man, she hammered that one. That fish thought she was huge, but man, I don't know if you could see the rod tip on that. I mean, this little guy just came up and hammered it. Thinks he's about a 5-pounder. It's gonna take a couple of years to get there, but little fish. It's funny how sometimes the little ones will hit it harder than the big fish do. But that was textbook. You know, it was all out here. Even though we can't see the grass, there's random clumps just kind of spread out here, and you know, I'm just kind of running it through that grass, just ticking along the tops of those blades of grass, and they'll come up out of there and eat this thing.
That's what you got.
No, he's getting bites. He needs to.
That one just pulled right out of his mouth. I felt the tension on the fish, and he ripped it right out of his mouth. It was all my fault.
He's getting bites now. I'd keep that. What you're doing, Scott, I'm gonna tell you, your body, when you got that bite, your body was facing half left, and you try to set right. So anytime you set the hook, it's like if you are boxing, you want to be squared up to your target if you're in a fight. So anytime I'm casting, I will rotate my body so that I am facing the direction of my bait. And this, in that case, you know, if I've got my bait over here, but I'm facing this way, if I try to set the hook, for one, I'm limited in my range of motion, so I'm not getting that full hook set. Now, you will get lucky. Sometimes, you know, you'll hook them, but I can't tell you how many times I've lost a fish because I was facing the other way, or just kind of, you know, was just kind of going through the motions. And especially with the frog, I catch myself with the frog. You know, with a bait like this, that line is constantly tight because it's a constant retrieval, so that line is tight all the time. With a frog, there's times where you'll have plenty of slack, especially if there's a little bit of a wind, it'll put a bow in your line. So I tend to, when I set the hook with that frog, I tend to I'll take a step back and hammer them. Because a lot of times, I mean, that it's a split second, and you might not have the time to reel up real quick before you set that hook. A little better one.
Mm-hmm.
Not a giant, but we'll take her. Yeah, she wanted it. You can see she's got it choked down in there. Better fish.
Good fish.
Same exact place. Inhaled right in the top. Nice 2.5 pound fish. So one of two things could be happening right now. Either the bite is starting to turn on. We got a little bit, sun's getting a little higher, so they might start feeding now, or we've developed some kind of pattern where they're wanting a moving bait. So what I'll do with this chatterbait when I'm fishing in heavy cover situations like this, because it's can be so difficult, is I just want to hit, you know, you've got this big hole right here, so I want to hit the back sides of it. I want to cast all the way to the mat, right to the edge of it, and this way I can cover that entire hole. If I throw in the middle of it, I'm only getting half of it, and I might spook the fish that might be in there. Or, you know, you see there's a little cut back there that might allow me to get back there. I'll try to cast it back up in there and kind of bring it through. I'll kind of maneuver my rod tip kind of around, you know, so I can maneuver my bait in and around these weeds. But as you can see, right in front of the boat here, you've got these little clumps of hydrilla grass out here. You know, one here, here, and what they'll do is they'll hold right at the base of these big clumps. So the goal is to cast beyond them, and then, you know, rip that chatterbait right by them. And a lot of times, if they're sitting there, it's just the easy snack. They'll come and they'll grab it, you know, as it's coming by that piece of grass that they're laying in. So it's a little bit more challenging when you're trying to fish a bait like this. That's, you know, when it in really confined spaces. Yeah. It seems like they might start to be becoming a little bit more active right now. You're starting to see a little bit more activity on the surface, some fish chasing bait. Yeah, you can see that this water's kind of dirtied up a little bit. Right now, it's mainly the reason I'm picking this white is because the time of year. Right now, we're in the middle of a shad spawn, and so if you look at some of the fish that you're catching, you know what there's one. Oh, she come off. If you you know, I'll find different baits and stuff, different, you know, fish that I put in the live well, they're choking up what they're eating. And if you look at the majority of what they're choking up, it's tiny little shad right now, because we're in the midst of the shad spawn, and that's what they're primarily eating, small baits that are white. So I put, you know, I've got a 1/2 ounce chatterbait on here with a white trailer, and to me, you know, it's a pretty small bait, but it mimics, you kind of see the action on it, mimics, you know, kind of a shad. So that's why I'm throwing the white. Now we're about to get into the season when the bluegills start to spawn. So I've also seen, you know, here in this time of year where bluegill colored baits will work, or even black and blue. You know, the bluegill here in Florida they're real dark. You know, their backs are almost black, so that's why that black and blue tends to do so well down here. But I've I've been having a lot more success on the white right now, and I think that's primarily just because of that shad spawn. That's not to say that they wouldn't hit another color, but I started with white because of that. While we're back in this little opening here, we're going to try to cover pretty much every little hole and crack and crevice. You want to try to cover as much water back here. You know, with what we're seeing, these fish are kind of hitting in these little holes and these little openings. So we're going to try to hit them all while we're back here. You know, just kind of strategically work our way around here and try to cast to everything that we see. I don't think that was a bass. There are also a lot of gar in here, so that's something we want to take into consideration too. Sometimes you can almost tell when a gar bites, or you can see when there's movement on the surface. A lot of times gar will give themselves away because they'll surface, and you can kind of see, you know, that long kind of silhouette, that long skinny silhouette from their body. You know, I get a lot of people ask me the question when it comes to fishing a chatterbait, and that's, do you like using mono? Do you like using monofilament? Do you like using fluorocarbon, or do you like using braid? And that's, you know, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that question. I think a lot of it's personal preference. I personally like fishing with braid, and simply because I feel like I can sense, you know, when I hit grass, or when I hit, you know, come across some rocks, or it's a shell bottom, I can feel what my bait is coming into contact with much better. Oh, there's one. We're gonna go to her. She's a big one. I'm probably gonna have to dig her out. Okay, I lied. The grass got me that time. She's not nearly as big as I thought. And this grass can be very deceiving. You might think you got a giant on there, and then you end up with one of those. But it's a fish, so we'll take it. But back to what I was saying is, you know, with the braid, I feel like I can detect when I come into contact with a piece of grass, or I get that bite, I can detect it better. Now, there's times when fishing with braided line can actually hurt you, and if you're not using the right rod, that's when it comes into play. And what I mean by that, so, you know, braided line doesn't have any stretch whatsoever. There's no stretch, and although you'll feel that bite better, what it forces you to do is, because that line is so sensitive, is you're going to feel that bite as soon as you get it. So what you might do is you might prematurely set that hook before that fish completely has it, you know, down far enough in their mouth. So what tends to happen is you set the hook just a split second a little earlier than you would with, let's say, a fluorocarbon, because you feel it sooner, and you end up hooking them kind of in the corner in that meat, you know, not in that, you know, just a little bit of flesh part of their mouth. And, you know, if it's a bigger fish with a lot of weight, or there's cover like this that you're trying to pull them through, a lot of times it'll just pull through that little flesh part in the corner of their mouth. Now, if you fish braided line with a glass rod, something with a real, you know, soft tip like this rod has, then it's got that extra little bit of give. Now, if you try to fish a chatterbait and I'm throwing braided line, but I've got a, you know, a extra fast action rod, which is super sensitive rod, and there's a good chance that's what's going to happen to you. You're going to lose fish. You know, and some guys, you know, you'll ask them and they'll say, hey, I like throwing heavy fluorocarbon or heavy monofilament, and there's a reason for that. You know, it's got a little bit of stretch, so even though that fish might hammer it, that little stretch in the line might give them that extra split second to get that bait just a little further down in their mouth, which ultimately will lead to landing more fish and losing less fish. So it's, like I said, a lot of it's personal preference. You know, there's not a right or wrong answer. You know, it's just kind of what you prefer, but those are all good things to take into consideration, you know, depending on what the conditions are, what kind of cover you're fishing, all that stuff. See how like with this hydrilla here, how it's topped out?
Yep.
And then where it tops out, it kind of, some spots it lays over like here and creates kind of a canopy. I've been noticing a lot of my bites will come if I kind of maneuver my bait, I'm swimming it, and then I kind of bring it underneath. A lot of them are sitting right underneath that, just that little can. Exactly. Sitting in the shade. Yeah, you don't. Yeah, like when you throw this chatterbait, you know, you can let it sink for a second. You don't want to be just under the surface, but you don't want to be on the bottom. Think of it as you want to be right in the middle of the water column. That's kind of what I've found to be the sweet spot, is just kind of right in the middle. And don't ignore these little spots out in the open, just these little clumps out here. I feel like I've caught more fish in the clumps out in the open than I do anywhere else. You know, throwing past the clump and just ripping that thing right by it. Yeah?
Yep.
Did you ever set the hook?
Yeah.
No, that was not beautiful. Remember, you got mono, so you can set on that thing because it stretches. Good one. Why y'all keep fooling me? There we go. Nice chunk. That one followed it back to the boat. Good little fish right there. Go get your mama. Tell her we're here. A lot of them are short striking it. There's another one. A lot of them are short striking it. Oh, right on the top of the lip. Well, it looks to me like Scott and I have gotten on a little bit of a pattern here with the chatterbait. So we're just gonna keep working this big grass flat, and Scott's on now. Just keep it tight. Good fish. Yeah, keep reeling. He's just stuck in grass. Yeah.
Yep, he's good.
Yep. That's a good one. Pulling drag, ain't she?
Yeah.
When's the last time you felt a fish pull drag like that?
Wow. Wow.
Yep, just nice and easy. Just bring her on over. Keep your rod tip down. Try not to let her jump. And then just ease her on over here.
Could have fooled me.
Oh, nice fish, man. Nice fish. Give me a little line. Here you go, Scott. Look at Scott with big fish of the day so far. She's caught up in the net. Give me
that same thing. Right when it hit the water.
right when it hit the water, right?
Right when it hit the water.
There you
I thought
go.
I had some weeds here.
I'll hold it. Oh, I'm letting her get the best of me there.
Good girl.
Nice. Good job, man. Yeah, we're just put that one on the right, yeah. They got no barbs on them. I had that happen. That seemed to be kind of what was going on when I was telling you. It's like, it's weird. It's like you'd think it would be the same effect with the frog. You know, you're fishing a frog, you land right on top of them. They do that, but they don't. They haven't been. You know, it's like with this chatterbait, it almost, you know, simultaneously as that bait's entering the water, that fish is just, it's just amazing the reaction that these fish have when that bait hits the water.
You think that vibration is what irritates the lateral line and kind of like
I think,
to make them destroy it?
yeah, I think I call the vibration of the chatterbait the dinner bell, because I do truly believe that. I really think, you know, I always say that, you know, the chatterbait tends to catch big fish. And don't get me wrong, I mean, you catch small fish too, but I tend to catch a lot more big fish on a chatterbait than I do on any other. And I think it has a lot to do with the vibration of that blade, you know, between the noise and the vibration it gives off. I think that when the fish hit it, a lot of times they're just angry, you know. They usually hit it with a purpose when they do. You know, but a lot of people would look at this type of cover and, you know, would probably steer away from throwing something with an exposed hook like a chatterbait, you know, just because it could potentially, you know, gets hung up in so much. You know, you think of, you know, maybe like a fluke, you know, jerkbait, or you know, Texas rig worm, or a frog. You know, a lot of those weedless style of baits, you know, just to make it a little easier. But you know, sometimes when you're willing to, you know, just change it up a little bit and do something that's not as, you know, not always the traditional, you know, style of fishing and what you're in, sometimes it'll pay off. With that said, though, for this chatterbait, for that hook being exposed, it really does come through this hydrilla quite nicely, if you know how to work it. We've got just a little bit of a breeze out here. It's not too much and not too little. You know, sometimes you want just a slight breeze. Not to mention, if there was no breeze, it would just be stagnant and just so hot out here. Right now it's probably about, I'd say 89 degrees. It's going to get up into the mid 90s today. So that wind definitely makes it a little more bearable. But I'll tell you what really makes it more bearable is when you're catching fish. It helps you take your mind off the heat a little bit when you're getting a good amount of bites. I'll tell you what, with 95 degrees, no wind, and you ain't getting a bite in an hour, you start questioning what you're doing out here. But that's when, a lot of times that's when complacency sets in, you know. You just start kind of going through the motions. You ain't got a bite in a while. You stop focusing on the way you're working your bait quite as much. And that's typically when, especially in a fishery like this, any cast can be a trophy fish. And that's when you'll get that big bite that you're not really waiting for. It'll catch you off guard, and you'll end up kicking yourself and regretting that you lost your focus. We've caught some nice quality fish this morning, you know, in the 3 to 4 pound range, and good healthy fish, but we're bound to come across a big one. There's a lot of big fish in here. Just waiting for that big bite. It's always fun trying to wrench them out of this vegetation, because the big ones always seem to somehow find something to burrow themselves into, try to come off. Ought to be one back in this pocket here. And sometimes, oh, there she is. No, I'm gonna flip her. She's a good one, but I'm gonna flip her. She's not quite ready. She's a little bigger than I thought, actually.
Good fish. Nice.
Oops, sorry. She got that thing. Let me get myself a little line here. She got that thing. way down in there. And you guys saw me, y'all were watching. You know, we talked about how vital it is to be very accurate in your cast, especially with this style of fishing, this kind of cover, this bait. You know, sometimes it's you know, that 2 or 3 feet off can make the difference. So that's a good healthy fish right there. So what do you think, Scott?
Good fish.
Yep. I think she followed it out. It was all the way back there.
Kind of opening, right?
Well, yeah, I'd cast it all the way to the back side of that hole, and it just looked picture perfect. And you know, I don't know if she had followed all the way through, but she didn't hit it till I got about up to that opening.
Or that choke point where you can see the.
Yep, right there. And when she first hit it, I couldn't tell how big she was because when she hit it, she started running right at me. So I couldn't really feel the weight until she turned. I just love that chatterbait bite though. So I got my buddy Scott out here. As you guys know, he's been working them on the back of the boat. Silent but deadly.
Right, back here hooking big fish, not saying anything.
Yeah.
Kinda right next to the boat.
But so far, Scott's biggest is a 7-pounder. Scott actually caught that 7-pounder in a tournament we were fishing on Lake Okeechobee. Scott had never fished in, oh, there's another. Not quite as big, but, oh, she come off. What do you think? I think we got a pattern dialed in. Went through a couple baits.
Underwater. Vibrating. Bait here.
Yep, vibrating jig / chatterbait. But
I almost think like a heavy spinnerbait work, but it might get caught up.
yeah, and that's the biggest difference between the spinnerbait. As much as I love throwing a spinnerbait, the difference between trying to throw a spinnerbait out here as opposed to a chatterbait is
You gotta hit all the open holes.
this blade will come through that grass a lot better than a spinnerbait. You know, spinnerbait will give off definitely a lot more flash, but I think this grass would stop up those blades. The swivels on those blades would get bogged down and it would kind of lose its action. But I was saying Scott's biggest fish so far is 7 pounds. He caught that one in a tournament that we won in Okeechobee. It was his first time fishing Lake Okeechobee. And we managed to win a tournament. So I told Scott, he's done that a couple times now. I told him, next time I go to Vegas, I'm bringing him with me. The 10.5 pounder. It's another good pocket right there. And what it is I don't believe these fish are necessarily just sitting in the open. What they're doing is they're hanging out on the edges of these grass mats, and they're just ambushing bait with as much bait as out here. You know, if you look at the bait, you know, I'll throw this here and you can see how the bait will scatter. They're hanging in the thickest of this grass, and you can see I'll kind of probably spook them. And they're not really jumping around, but you can see them kind of flickering here. And they're hanging out in the thickest of this grass, so it makes it. You can kind of see all the bait is just hanging right on the top of these mats, and it's making it, you know, kind of hard. You know, don't get me wrong, the bass can definitely come through here and get it, but it's not as easy of a meal as it is for this chatterbait. You know, if I come out here and I'm running this chatterbait right along the edge, and all they got to do is just pop out and just grab that thing. So I think that's why we're having, you know, success with this particular technique. And I mean, this is a huge grass flat. We've only covered maybe a quarter of it. Maybe an eighth of it. Yeah.
Maybe.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we only go in this fucking area right
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. And once we go over there, kind of out further in front of where you're at, that's kind of a little bit better for a frog just because it gets so thick. None of the other guides are really catching them right now. You know, they're normally you'll see when other guides are catching, you know, they'll keep up to date on their social media and their website. They'll be posting pictures, and nobody's really catching them right now. So I went over to I went to the main marina the other day. I had a big corporate trip I had to do out of there, and a lot of the other guides are like, hey man, where you been? I ain't seen you in a while, you know, blah, blah. You know, just making small talk. Now, granted, they know they've been seeing some of the pictures of my clients holding up fish, so they're kind of trying to figure out where I've been fishing and making little comments. They're like, hey, you know, your trailer looks kind of dirty. Where you been fishing, you know? I said, don't worry about where I'm fishing. But yeah, it's a good feeling. You know, you get guys that got, you know, 20 plus years of experience guiding. And, you know, right now, just this time of year with the heat, the bite's just been super, super slow. I mean, even with live bait, which typically live bait always produces, you know. And, I mean, it's just tough right now. So it's a good feeling, you know, when you get into a trend and you figure something out, you find a good area with fish, and, you know, you're able to put your clients on fish and, you know, help them create the memories that, you know, the reason that they've come down to Florida and the reason that they essentially why they hire me. You know, they want to come down and they want to catch a big Florida strain largemouth, and you know, so I'm kind of hard on myself. I put a lot of pressure on myself because I want every client that steps on my boat to have, you know, the most amazing experience and for them to be able to talk about it for the rest of their life. So, you know, because of that, I just put a lot of pressure, but it's fun. You know, it's a good time. It's definitely a good feeling when you got other guides, very experienced anglers, you know, trying to nitpick and figure out where you're at, where you're catching your fish. I came right off that mat. And that was what I was saying, Scott, you know, we could cover this whole area with the chatterbait. And then after the chatterbait, we could literally come and punch all these mats because they're under these mats. And they may have not wanted to swim out and commit to that chatterbait, but if you drop it on their head, there's a good chance they're gonna eat it. I bet you there's some monsters just hanging out under these mats. Well, I know for a fact there are because we've caught them. Missed that one. Come on, girl, eat it. And that's why a lot of times, like when Scott caught that other fish, he threw just to the edge of, like say right here, just to the edge of that mat. So you got to think, that fish is sitting there, you're 50 yards back, and that thing just lands right there. It's just dropping and they're just sitting right there. That's exactly what happened with that big one that Scott got. Just hold her tight. Don't try to muscle her. I'm going to her. Just pin her. All right, so Scott's hooked up. We're gonna have to go get this big girl. He may have gotten his giant on the frog like he was wishing for. Well, just keep it tight. You're not keeping it tight enough. You're not. Keep reeling. Nice
Where's that
fish.
frog
It's
at? Way in her throat.
buried in her throat. Yeah. There you go, dude. Nice fish. Show that one to the camera, man.
Oh yeah, it's a good fish there.
Long. She's long, big head, but skinny. And this is typically this time of year post spawn. You know, you'll get these fish. You know, they're finished spawning. They'll be long and skinny like that. You would have caught her a month or two ago, and she was full of roe.
A lot fatter.
You had her.
Amateur hour over here.
Just push down hard.
Yeah, just try not to jab her. There's more. She definitely wasn't coming out of there.
Here, let me see.
Captain.
Let's see.
Come on, Captain. Help me out.
Alrighty. Good job, man.
Thank you, sir.
Nice work. He's determined to get that big frog bite, and he got it.
Let me get hold on one more.
Nice work.
Couple picks.
That was on the frog.
That was on the frog. So faithful. White belly frog.
These.
Flipper, you know.
I'm just gonna flip her. There she is. Oh, and the hook just fell out. Nice fish.
Good one. Chunky monkey.
Yeah, nice little chunk. She's got some battle scars on her. Alrighty. All right, guys. Thanks for watching this episode within the spread. I really hope you guys enjoyed it, and hope that you learned from some of the different techniques and some of the different baits that we were working. For nobody that's ever really fished something like you saw in the video today, with the really heavy cover and a really thick hydrilla and the hyacinths, it can be very overwhelming if you're not used to it, but as you saw in the video, it can also pay off. If you use the right techniques, you fish it the right way, and you use some good quality baits, you can definitely get it done. But yeah, so just to kind of recap, some of the baits that we're using. Scott's holding it's a Z-Man leapfrog, and it's basically a hollow body popping frog. And that was one of the key baits today, black with white legs. And today they were just kind of eating funny. Scott caught some good ones on that frog, but he had probably about 5 or 6 other blow-ups where they were short striking it, or they were just coming up and just swiping at it and weren't completely eating it. So who knows, had it been tomorrow or had it been yesterday, maybe they would have ate the frog a little better. But it was definitely getting some bites. And the other bait that produced for us today was the Z-Man jackhammer chatterbait. This color here is a white with a little bit of chartreuse. And for our trailer, we're using a Z-Man trailer. This is basically the Z-Man razor shad. You can see it's kind of got that Swimbait ribbed kind of body to it. It's got a really great action on it. So if you're looking for a good Swimbait trailer, these pretty much all the plastics that Z-Man makes, I mean, they're like indestructible. They use that special plastic to where, I mean, you can see any normal soft plastic will completely tear if I pull it like that, but it just kind of goes right back to where it was. So you can catch a lot of fish on these baits before having to put a fresh one on. But yeah, that's just a recap from what we what we did today. We caught some really good quality fish. No giants, no 8+ pounders today, but that's okay. You guys have got the meat and potatoes of really what it's going to take to catch those big trophy fish. and thick, heavy cover like we've got here today. So again, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time.